Hello, I am Ron Baker, and welcome back to Empowered at Last. Today's episode is going to be a little bit of a diversion from the answering questions that I've been doing recently. You see, I love that we can learn from everyday life. Everything that takes place around us is an opportunity for us to observe and evaluate and apply it back to ourselves. The ultimate question is, who do I choose to be? We have a choice. Yes, tons of it is set up in our early lives where we have certain challenges that become certain defenses and protections and patterns. All of that is true. And we do need a process for going back to resolve and nurture those things. That is all programmed in the nervous system, just like the hard drive of a computer. However, every day of our lives, we are surrounded by the constancy of what we learn from each other. You are teaching people every day of your life as well. Most people don't necessarily take the time to consider that unless they stop and say, "Let me tell you something," which they would consider teaching or advising or impacting. We impact people every day with every choice that we make. That does not mean we need to feel guilty. It does not mean it's our job. But it is a really important thing to consider that every choice I make either impacts life around me from an intention of love, nurturing, support, positivity, authenticity, courage, whatever qualities we're practicing, or we impact people from our fear, shame, and judgment. We impact people from our defense behavior. I've done every single one of these things constantly in my life, and one of the things that makes the quality of my life better and better and better is paying attention to what I'm putting out. Pay attention to when there's a conflict. Paying attention to when something triggers me. One of the most powerful things we can do is use self as a starting place. What is this revealing about me? What is this situation teaching me about myself? I like to say that life is constantly revealing you to you. But if you're not paying attention to self and you don't embrace your life as a process of developing, deepening, and enhancing self, then you may not be seeing life so much from a reference point of life being like a force that informs you and encourages you and gives you clues all the time. When I approach my life in this way, I grow the most, I set myself up the best, and I feel better and better about me. That is one of the biggest grand prizes of life that we can learn to focus on. What choices can I make that leave me feeling the best about myself? I'm so glad that I chose that. I'm so glad that I responded to that situation in a compassionate way rather than reacting or acting out. There are times when we all do these wounded choices, and then we can turn it around back to the gift of I'm feeling great about my choices by simply taking responsibility when we discover that we've acted out, defended, treated someone with less than care, when we've needed to go through our learning curve that's just not very pretty. All of us have a learning curve to deal with our wounding of fear, shame, and judgment. We need a space to do that. But we can turn that learning curve into a much more impactful, helpful situation if when we realize that we've been in one of those moments if we will merely go back to the person or people involved and take responsibility. I'm so sorry that in my learning curve I have impacted you, or if I impacted you. I did this recently with a dear colleague of mine, and I said, I just feel like that my wound needed to vent there as we were sharing in our meeting the other day, and it was really important for me to get out. But I also discovered in that I felt like I was being spoiled, that I was being entitled a little bit. And even though my colleague was quite generous and said, I don't think you were being spoiled and entitled, I felt like that was a really important thing for you to get out. Both are true. I did need to get it out. We do need to have a safe space to express our wounding, our fear, our charged feelings. And sometimes those feelings are tinged with entitlement and being spoiled. And even if she was being quite generous with me in my share, I feel that I was being a little entitled and spoiled. And so I owned it. I shared it. I even told 2 other friends, just so that I had a safe place to admit my learning curve, which gave me a deeper way to take responsibility for turning it around. But I also took the fear and the shame and the judgment out of it. By sharing it, I faced my fear. By sharing it with my own compassion and self-acceptance, I was healing layers of fear, layers of shame, and judgment as well. My friend reflected back acceptance, likely impacted in some ways by my willingness to own my own learning curve, my wounded learning curve. So I just encourage giving you hints and clues about how you can set your life up better and better and better. And one of those main things, to recap for a second, is how can I make choices that leave me feeling the best about me? That you are fully in charge of. So this is not actually the subject specifically that I want to talk with you about today. What I want to talk about comes out of the statement that I said, life is constantly revealing ways for us to learn. I recently spent a week at the beach with some people I love quite a lot. And for whatever reason, I was in a place where I wanted to do more observing rather than just going in and being habitual. I'm doing a whole bunch of re-evaluating my life and what choices serve me and which ones don't. And so I went into the week determined to do 2 things. One was to be true to myself and what I needed to do, which included giving myself some private space and not just feeling like I had to stay with the group the entire time. I conveyed that to them in some way, the ones certainly that I felt like it would be important to share it with. And I said, yes, it's been such a great week because I've taken the time to make sure I had time for me in addition to my time with all of you. That was the first way that I set myself up well. The second way was by paying attention to the dynamics that occurred with others. One of the things that I realized has become habitual, whether it's the wisest choice or not is up to each person to decide, but my observation of this very important subject that is rarely talked about is teasing. The impact of teasing. I think that we live on a planet that has gotten further and further away from nurturing, from acknowledging, encouraging, inspiring those around us, particularly those who are most habitual or are longer relationships. I think it is so important that we don't let that happen. So to encourage, inspire, acknowledge, super, super important. But in our world that has gotten away from a lot of nurturing, where people don't even feel comfortable to say heartfelt things to each other, we've often replaced the banter, the back and forth, the sharing with things like being clever, things like being funny, things like teasing. Oh, well, I only tease you because I notice you and because you matter to me. To some degree, I think it's vital that we have humor and that we have the freedom to tease and play. Really important, beautiful, playful parts of relationships. I love that. But if there's not a lot of acknowledgement and heartfelt sharing going on that balances it, and the main way that you engage with someone is through quips and constant clever ways to, I won't go so far as to say put someone down, but to go, I noticed that you made a mistake. I noticed that you missed the volleyball. And to do it in clever ways is one level of teasing. Another that we all need to watch out for is when we have unresolved feelings that we have not expressed with another person. And instead of coming to them and saying, can we talk about this? Instead, passing on the message through a joke, there's a bigger impact than we may want to admit. It's called passive-aggressive behavior, and it mostly comes out of the fear of having a heartfelt conversation. The fear of being vulnerable. The fear that in our negotiation with each other we might be wrong. And think about it for a second. If teasing, particularly slightly charged teasing, is most of the banter back and forth, then we may not have created a foundation where we can both feel safe to have that heartfelt conversation. These are hugely important things to notice, and I was thrilled that I happened to be in a space where I was ready to back out of my habitual teasing even, in order to notice the dynamics. And because I wasn't in the middle of that, it became a little easier for me to see when someone felt tinged or hurt or confused by the teasing, particularly if it happened in a rather consistent way. We need each other. We so need each other in the world that we live in. We need each other even if we were in the best of times. But we're in a world that is quite out of balance. We live in a world that has not been modeling nurturing and valuing and championing one another in many ways. And therefore, we need each other to know we have safe places to come together, to work out our wounding, our fear, shame, and judgment. We need each other. And so I deeply encourage in this week's message for you to evaluate the impact of teasing, whether it's you teasing others or whether it's, wow, my family, my friends, we really have gotten too used to this teasing, slightly sarcastic, slightly negative, slightly degrading teasing. It's a dangerous road, and it does not create a foundation where we feel safe, where we feel trusting, where we feel the value of one another. So, evaluate. Shift where you feel you would set yourself up better another way. And if you need to have a very gentle conversation where you either take responsibility, for instance, you might say to someone, I've been looking at my choices as of late, and I realize that I tease you an awful lot. And so I apologize if any of that has impacted you, and I want to make an adjustment. I would like for us to deepen our relationship and make it a little more balanced. The play and the fun and the teasing is most of the time heartfelt. I know that. But I also want us to be able to be directly supportive and encouraging. So if you need to take responsibility for some of your interactions that you recognize have gotten out of balance, please do. It's also important to go to those you feel who have been teasing or biting or negative or sarcastic in your direction. Now, I don't suggest that you go and blame them, shame them, point it out in a way of accusing. That's not going to work out well. What I suggest you do is say something like this. Even if you're stretching to include yourself in the pattern. Much wiser to include yourself rather than create the risk of superiority in your feedback. Even if you haven't been teasing this person, chances are you can find where you haven't been in full value of others throughout your life. We're all human in that learning curve. So you might go to the person and say, I've noticed in our relationship, we can sometimes, very powerful word, we can sometimes get caught up in teasing each other so much that it doesn't always feel safe. And I just would love for us to balance that out with some direct support, encouragement, just sharing and listening without the clever quips on top of it. Without the comebacks and it can even become competitive. Who's the most clever? Who's the wittiest? Well, it's wonderful to be clever, witty, fun, and playful in balance and context. If you're going to tease, make sure you put tons of heart behind it and that you balance. That is the message for the week. Continue to pay attention to your life and how you can set yourself up better and better and better. Have a great week. I will see you soon.